record. So,
Hongbing, I will introduce you, although you need no introduction. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the final SebeokSeminars webinar run by the IASS. It's with some pleasure that I announce the last of the seminars, because it means that we've got a full set now, but it's with some sadness as well, because it marks a time when we're getting very close to the 20th anniversary of Sebeok's death. He died in December 2001. Quite a few of us remember that. But let's look forward. Sebeok was always looking forward. And I remember 20 odd years ago, I was being introduced to somebody, I think it was Martin Krampen, possibly someone from Central Europe. I was being introduced to by Sebeok, and Sebeok started by saying, this is Martin Krampen, or whoever it was, to me. And the other person then said, yeah, but who's this? Pointing to me. And Tom Sebeok said, he's the future. And of course I was very flattered. You know, it's not, even at the time I knew that it wasn't necessarily true, but I was very flattered by it, and it gave me lots of enthusiasm and you know, a sense of loyalty and so on. So when I met Hongbing Yu 10 years ago, a Sebeok scholar, somebody who was working on modeling in particular, and has since gone on to write in quite an illustrious fashion on that topic, and has written about Sebeok, I thought I would start to introduce Hongbing Yu, the future. Okay, and the future is happening now, because I would like to introduce Hongbing, who is currently in Nanjing, but has a post at Ryerson University in Toronto, and he will talk about the Chinese connection, which specifically is about an eminent linguist called Zhao, who, sorry, that's not his name, is it? Hongbing, what's his full name?
Yuan Zhao?
Yeah, that's right. So this was a linguist that Sebeok referred to at some considerable length. And well, I'll let Hongbing tell you the story, because it's a very interesting one, and theoretically it's quite intriguing, and hopefully there will be questions at the end. So Hongbing, many thanks for this. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your kind introduction. And I'll start now. Friends and colleagues, welcome to this final webinar of Sebeok's Millennium webinar series, organized by the International Association for Semiotic Studies. I am Hongbing Yu from Ryerson University. First of all, I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our beloved friend and colleague, also a great mentor of mine, Paul Cobley, and all the organizers of this series events, which I think have shed timely and crucial new light on the relevance and significance of Thomas Sebeok's work in the 21st century. Right now, I'm getting a feeling that, as fate would have it, you know, somehow this is a day that has been anticipated by a historical essay that I published in the journal Biosemiotics in 2013. So they asked me for the same title as my talk today. In this talk, I will be revisiting what I wrote in that essay with some of the new thoughts and ideas that I have developed over the years, especially over the past month. Many of these thoughts were, of course, inspired by Sebeok's work. And the reasons that I'm revisiting the topic for the webinar are many. But the most important one, I think, is a vision that I believe to be true. Let me share second slide. I think this is the vision that I think is particularly important for semioticians in the 21st century. I think if we are to develop a comprehensive account of the significance of Thomas Sebeok's work in the 21st century, then we have to explore and understand his connection with semioticians and or crypto-semioticians, as Sebeok would call them, in a broader global community of semiotics, that is, including communities outside of his Euro-American milieu. But on the other hand, we know for sure that the intellectual impact of Sebeok on scholars in these communities is an important topic. But there is another important but easily ignored topic, that is the possible resonance, the potential resonance that Sebeok's work could have for the scholars in these communities. You know, these two dimensions will be the foci of this webinar. So first, I would like to show you, I will show you the Sebeok's personal contact and correspondence with the Chinese semioticians or semiotically minded scholars in China. And after that, I will introduce the direction for future research on Sebeok and beyond, stemming from a kind of resonance that I have identified in Sebeok's work for semiotics in East Asia, or in China at least. So this is the outline of my talk. And for the first dimension, my survey highlights three figures, including the one Paul just referred to, and the late linguist and semiotician, the one true founding father of Chinese semiotics, I would say, and the late logician and semiotician, Shanquan Li, and the Chinese-Canadian semiotician turned novelist by the name of Yi Weixue. Quite a few things have changed actually since 2013 when I published that article in Biosemiotics, especially regarding the general attitude of Chinese semioticians toward Sebiokian semiotics. And while some things still remain the same, for example, the part of history that cannot be changed, especially the history of the correspondence and contact between these scholars and Sebeok himself. So let's take a look at the first one. So it is now hardly possible, I would say, to trace the date and the location of the event on Yuan Chao's first encounter with Sebeok. So little is known about the details in that regard. However, there are two things that I can say for certain. First, Sebeok spoke quite favorably and highly of Chao, which is manifested in his famous book, Science, an Introduction to Semiotics. The book was first published in 1994, I remember, and then the second edition was published in 2001. Although, you know, the entry Chao or Yuan Chao is kind of missing in the index part of the book, most probably due to a mistake in manuscript arrangement or something like that. Readers will not find it difficult to interpret that Chao's work and thinking on the modeling system did provide some example and some or inspirations, you know, or insights for Thomas Sebeok, because Sebeok later adapted Chao's example of cabbages as models of kings, you know, by rephrasing the example in the standard semiotic idiom. That's what Sebeok did. I can say that, and we can say that, you know, the Sebeok did this. Oh, I think there's a mistake here, and it should be we can change this later, or not now. And then the discussion of Chao and his Cabbage King model in Sebeok's book and his work is also dealt with in full detail later by Floyd Merrill when he elaborates on Sebeok's often neglected theoretical source. And I think we should simply just change that because this would be a mistake. And let me change the name because that would be an oversight. Thomas Sebeok. And sorry about this. and also another name right here. Let me share the slide again. Desktop 2. Is it? This is share. Just a second. Right. And then now the second one I'd like to talk about is Shanquan Li and his connection with Thomas Sebeok. Shanquan Li was forerunner of Chinese semiotics. He met Sebeok at, I recall, 2 world congresses of ISS, the 5th World Congress of ISS in Berkeley, 1994, and the 7th World Congress of ISS in Dresden in 1999. However, Shanquan Li's acquaintance with Sebeok by mail, not email, was made quite a few years earlier. You know, they had frequently kept exchanging letters, and Sebeok also sent Li quite a lot of materials, and back in those days. And then I reached out to Shanquan Li on the afternoon of December the 11th, 2012, because that was before, that was when I was working on the historic essay, and reached out to him to ask him questions about Sebeok. Li was very passionate and excited about the questions, and he told me that he had invited Sebeok to come to go to Hubei University in 1988, you know, for a visit, and everything was well arranged. However, much to Li's regret, and the Sebeok's visit that was to take place, you know, in 1989, it was canceled by Sebeok himself, due out of his concern about the political situation in China back then, which is kind of like a sensitive topic. Although the other semioticians who had also been invited, you know, for instance, Sakamoto Hyakudai and this person, figure right here, the one on the right, Sakamoto Hyakudai, and he accepted an invitation, and among other semioticians, they came, and nothing befell them whatsoever. So one thing worth noting about their connection is that Shanquan Li, always believed that Sebeok was a very influential figure, both in semiotics and linguistics, and that his zoosemiotics had profound implications for today's semiotic studies. And unfortunately, Shanquan Li passed away in the year 2017. I think it was the same year when Jerzy Pelk passed away, but they met in the 1990s. And Jerzy Pelk was also invited to Shanquan Li's home, but this is irrelevant to our discussions of his connection with Sebeok. But there were kind of there's another dimension of connection in that regard. Now the third one I'd like to talk about is the connection between Sebeok and the Chinese-Canadian writer by the name of Yiwei Xue. Xue used to be a semiotician in Sebeok's time and is now an immigrant Chinese writer in Canada. He left the semiotics community about 2 decades ago and made a quite unique and considerably successful career out of literature. Maybe he's one of the most influential novelists in China, accompanied by big names or fortunes. He briefly left the literary circle in early 1990s and then returned in 1996, if I remember correctly. It was during this period that he actively participated in semiotics and got to know Sebeok personally and had maintained his personal contact with Sebeok ever since. So all this I learned from Yiwei Xue in December 2012, when we were exchanging email messages about Thomas Sebeok. Xue has published a few articles in the 1990s, basically heralding Sebeok as one of the 2 major pillars of modern semiotics, alongside Umberto Eco. I think that was it was a remarkably fitting comment. Also, Xue and the Sebeok exchanged correspondence quite often, and they told each other about their own lives. Um, for example, Xue once wrote to Sebeok about his pride novel titled Abandon. And then in a letter to Xue, Sebeok talked about Umberto Eco and also his own lifestyle, and when he would wake up in the morning and when he would start work during the day. The topics and content of these exchanges letters were quite friendly. The kind of the friends, pretty close friends would do was exchange between each other. So this might explain how Xue in those days got to know about Sebeok's lifestyle and also personality. And even now, having left semiotics at around the beginning of the century, and after the death of Sebeok in 2001, Xue, this writer, still holds his everlasting admiration and deep respect for this great semiotician, in his own words, and also his achievements. And I remember 1 year after the publication of my historical essay on Sebeok in biosemiotics, I completed my doctoral thesis with distinction on Sebeok's modeling system theory. And this is a cover of the thesis. And it was completed and submitted in 2014. I remember that when John Daly heard of this thesis, he insisted that I render it in English and published as soon as possible in the English world. But I resisted temptation. Also, I took Paul Copley's advice. And in retrospect, I think it was right. And many of my ideas have evolved ever since. And however, it still turns out that the year of 2014, when this thesis was completed, somehow coincided with, if not marked, a turning point in Sebeok studies in China. For one thing, the general attitude of Chinese semioticians toward the Sebeokian framework of semiotics has become way more positive than it was prior to the publication of my essay on Sebeok in biosemiotics in 2013. One of the reasons I figure is the ever-increasing involvement of Chinese semioticians in a global community of semiotics, especially in the wake of the 11th World Congress of ISS in Nanjing in 2012. As a result of such increasing involvement, Chinese semioticians' access to and their literature on Sebeok's work in China have both drastically increased. So I am listing two among the relevant publications. One is the Chinese translation of the forms of meaning in modeling systems theory and the semiotic analysis, co-authored by Sebeok and Danesi in the year of 2000. I translated this book into Chinese and in 2015, and this Chinese edition of the book came out in the year of 2016. And the other one is my own monograph published in Chinese on Sebeok's modeling system theory, and it was published by Soochow University Press in 2019. And in China and a world on Sebeok, I think, is this one. The Chinese Semiotic Studies special issue titled Thomas Sebeok for the 21st Century, which came out just this past month. I was the guest editor of this issue. I learned from Susan Perilli, one of the contributors to this issue, that this is probably the only publication out there celebrating the work of Sebeok 20 years after his death and 101 years after his birth. Here I would like to reiterate my heartfelt gratitude to Marcel Danesi for the idea of the publishing the special issue dedicated to Tom Sebeok, and also to Paul Copley for his suggestions about contributions. and to the peer reviewers and who took their time to review the manuscripts submitted to this issue. And also the decision of the editorial office of Chinese Semiotic Studies to include this special issue in the publication schedule of the journal is gratefully acknowledged. And in a way, this special issue points out future directions, some future directions for studies on Sebeok in particular and in semiotics in general, I guess. So in the introduction to this special issue, I provided an outline of how the issue came into being, a kind of a story. If you're interested, feel free to download the editorial for this special issue. It is titled, What is Semiotics but a Serious Modeling? And in this editorial, I expressed that I dared to intuit that there must have been a Zenist side to Thomas Sebeok that had enabled him to be so confident and calm as to proudly declare that he was a solipsist and proud of it. So my intuition has been somehow confirmed and encouraged by my exchange of email with two veteran Sebiokian semioticians, Paul Cobley and Dina Gordley, and both of whom have shared important anecdotes about Sebeok's fascination with Zen Buddhism or Zen cultural practices. And I feel so encouraged that I think I might as well just regard Sebeok as a crypto, Zenist. And I say this with confidence. And now we can consider these two pictures. The first one shows John Dealey standing before Sebeok's final resting place. Then, as if by zooming in, we have the second picture showing two Chinese characters, Mei Hua, or if you prefer, maybe kanji, which literally mean beautiful blossom. Now, there's an important connection or message that can be interpreted out of these two characters. I think at some point I will need to reach out to the Sebeok family, to confirm if my interpretation is correct or if my interpretation is too mistaken. Maybe the original intention of using these two characters on this sideboard was different from my interpretation now. But I think as semioticians, it's kind of a natural thing for us to do, to interpret, whatever we perceive. For example, these two characters. And the thing is that these two characters remind me of something. There's the famous flower sermon of the Buddha, or Sakyamuni Buddha. It is also recorded in the Zen tradition. And as you can see, this is the flower sermon, and the Sakyamuni Buddha is holding a white flower in his hand, or in some later versions of the painting of the story, they depict the Buddha as holding either a lotus or a white flower or a flower of another color. But Zen Buddhism originated in China. It traces its origin, back to Buddha himself, back to this letter. It goes like this. Once Sakyamuni Buddha, on the so-called Vulture Peak in India, in the midst of a vast assembly of beings or disciples, maybe nuns as well. He held up a flower and winked or smiled. The Buddha himself said nothing, and then the flower itself was a sermon, was the teaching. And a disciple named, Mahaka. I think his name is Mahaka Siapa, and that's the English version of it. Because in Chinese it's pronounced a different way. So this disciple smiled, and then Sakyamuni Buddha said, I have the treasury of the true Dharma I, something like that, and and the inconceivable mind of nirvana, and then this I entrust to this disciple Mahakasyapa. And so Buddha passed on his entire teaching, or wisdom, or dharma, in an instant, without words, and all was glimpsed from the flower. And Mahakasyapa, the disciple, had his eye opened and signaled his understanding without words, with a simple smile. So that's how the story goes. And this story is an icon for Zen tradition, but that the Buddha's dharma, the wisdom, was and is passed, master to disciple, wordlessly, mind to mind. And for centuries, Zen practitioners have presumed this founding legend was a kind of historical, but the story was coined, as it seems, in the medieval China, partly as a way of Zen Buddhism or Chan to defend itself or define itself, and also especially defend itself against the rival Buddhist schools back then. And I think the earliest known version of the story appeared in the 11th century in the Zen tradition. I think this quote is worth reading from Sakyamuni Buddha himself. These words, they go like this. I tell you, friend, that it's not possible by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the world where one does not take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear. But at the same time, I tell you that there's no making an end of suffering and distress without reaching the end of cosmos. Yet it's just within this fathom-long body, endowed with perception and cognition, that I declare that there is the world, the origination of the world, the cessation of the world, and a path of practice leading to the cessation of the world. And these words of Sakyamuni Buddha are also echoed in a very influential book written by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And in this connected, the book is titled The Connected Discourses of Buddha. It is clear that the world with which Buddha's teaching is principally concerned is the world of experience. And even objective world, so to speak, is of interest only to the extent that it serves as the necessary external condition for experience. So the word world used here doesn't refer to the world of atoms or particles, forces, and all makes up. It refers to the world of our experience. And Sakyamuni Buddha referred to this world experience as, if I remember correctly, as Saba, which literally translates into the all. And the Buddha said that there's nothing we can know outside of that. And he's not saying that there is no external reality. He is just, the thing is that he was not referring to this. It was not making a statement of that kind. He's not saying there's no external reality. It's just that we can, all we can ever know if our experience of reality there might be. So this particular insight rings a bell for semanticians, especially so if we compare it with Sebeok's understanding of the crucial term Umwelt or Umwelten and modeling. They are perfectly in line with each other to me. So Sebeok, in his book Science Introduction to Semiotics, in 2 editions, he made the same claim that the term Umwelt has proved notoriously difficult to translate, and although subjective universe, the phenomenal world, the self world variously approximate the author's intent, however, model renders it more incisively, especially in view of this credo that every subject is the constructor of the Umwelt. So to me, if we compare, these two insights, Sebeok's insight and Sakyamuni's insight, we will see that there is something very crucial and basically, I would say, fundamental to Sebeok's own theorizing in semiotics. And you would find it easier to understand, to even to relate to Sebeok, when he claimed that he was a proud solipsist semiotician. To me, Sebeok was not only a master semiotician these days, but more importantly, he was a grand artist in semiotics, having his own style that is beyond solipsism, that can be better appreciated in light of Zen Buddhism. So, and now with this summary slide listing what I have contributed to, I think the 21st century explorations of Sebeok's work, my talk is concluded. And I have argued for placing and reviewing Sebeok in a broader global semiotics community. We also demonstrated Sebeok's connection with Chinese semioticians. I have selected some of them, and then I showcased the special issue of Chinese Sebeok studies dedicated to Sebeok, and I suggested the Sebeok Zen side, and then by doing so, I think I have introduced the future direction of research on Sebeok's work. And now I believe that you know more about Sebeok's Chinese connection than you knew like 34 minutes, 40 minutes ago, more or less so. So by coming to this talk, you acknowledge the importance of knowing about Sebeok's connection with the East Asian semioticians. And I salute you for that. And I look forward to the day when someone can explore and demonstrate for us Sebeok's Japanese and Korean connection.
Thank you, Hong Bing, and well done to keep within time. We have a little over 25 minutes for questions. Looking forward to hearing some. Hong Bing, if you stop sharing screen, we might be able to more easily see who's
Right.
got their hand up to discuss. Thanks. So, any comments, questions, general observations, complaints?
Do you have anything to say about semiotics and the I Ching, the Book of Changes?
Hong Bing?
Yeah, I think my internet connection is a bit unstable. I didn't catch Tyler's question. Sorry about that.
You might have frozen for a minute. Yeah. Tyler said, was there any connection with the Book of Change? The I Ching.
No, it's not Zen.
It's not. Yeah, it's not Zen, but it's also a very good direction for future studies. I haven't looked into that, but quite a few people, quite some people have connected the I Ching and the Book of Change and Zen Buddhism. I think that's something worth looking into, but I haven't found the traces of that in Sebeok's writings. Not yet.
Not in Sebeok, no.
No.
Nadine. Oh, we can't hear you. You're on mute, I think.
I would just mention Floyd Merrill, who has from time to time explored those consonances. And he was in close contact with Sebeok throughout his career.
That's right. Thank you, Murray. But I haven't heard from Floyd for quite a while now. The last time I heard from him, he hurt his hand, working on the project, the wood project, something like that. But that was quite a few years back.
Well, he retired to his native state of New Mexico with an orchard of pecan trees. And he comes driving through here about once a year, leaves me off a bag of pecans. He writes continuously, but doesn't publish in semiotic circles.
Right. I think I might reach out to him to inquire more about the potential connection between Sebeok and semioticism outside of his Euro-American milieu. Maybe Floyd can provide some insight. Thank you, Martin.
Hongbing, with regard to this future orientation and possible future avenues for Sebeok research, and especially the connection perhaps with Eastern philosophy. At first, it would seem that Sebeok was the last person in terms of his work, if not his personal dispositions, to have been so motivated and so interested. Anyone who has a familiarity with Sebeok's work, they know that he is he's very skeptical. He was a member of the Skeptic Society. That he insists on precise empirical procedures with science, even though his own work is very much of a theoretical bent. He draws on very rigorous science. For many years, he campaigned against some of the further reaches of animal studies and some of the more bizarre claims made there, and was allied with people like James Randi for the New York Academy of the Sciences major conference on clever hands. So, again, skeptical, again, very much scientific in his procedures, much more so, I would hazard to say, without too much controversy, I don't think, much more so than biosemiotics tends to be now. However, there's an essay from the clever hands period, that period of intense activity that culminated in the New York Academy of Sciences conference, where he wrote an essay called "The Ultimate Enigma of Clever Hands." I don't know how many people here know that essay, but effectively he's talking about the possibility that something approaching what we understand now as telepathy was in play in some part of interspecific communication. Very bizarre idea, and Sebeok's, he's willing to hold up his hands and say, we don't know about this yet. Same as with the nuclear project. He said, we don't know what our communication will be like 10,000 years in the future. We can only guess. Now, was that something that you had in mind when you were thinking about his interests in Eastern philosophy?
Yeah, definitely. This is why I smile, because they would definitely provide, I think, new future orientations for study on Sebeok, and also in semiotics in general. In Eastern philosophies, at least in Chinese philosophy, different schools of Chinese philosophy, and we can find insights from these different schools and the writings that can provide at least some guidance for us, or some precursors to the ideas that we can probably propose in the future. And I treasure this very much. I think this is very important. Unlike many of my colleagues in China who believes that the past is past and should forget about those things, and we need to move beyond that. But the thing is that, like Sebeok said himself, aptly put himself, And because we don't know about the future, what will actually happen, what our communication will be like in 1,000 or 10,000 years. We can maybe, if we need to build models of what will probably look like in the future, we need to rely on the previous models in the past. Yes. Yes, Alina.
Hello. Oh, okay. Okay. Can you actually hear me? I just lower my hand again so I don't forget afterwards. Okay. First of all, hello to everybody. And I just feel I should say something because I already introduced myself to you at one of the other SebeokSeminars, and that I work on Buddhist semiotics. So first of all, thanks very much for your talk. And now I really feel inspired to look more into the writings by Sebeok, and then I work on the Indian Buddhist tradition. So I feel, what you described is, I think it really captures very well the spirit of the future. Just recently, we also had the founding symposium for the International Association of Asian Semiotics. And let me just mention also, I work on Persis semiotics and cyber semiotics by Søren Brier. And I remember that Søren also told me that his books were going to be translated into Chinese. So I will check this, and maybe I can contact you to see whether this is actually still in process, such a translation. And thank you also very much for bringing in quotations actually from the connected discourses. And actually, it's just because I mentioned it in one of my papers. So this is more of a comment than a question, actually. I just wanted to add that what you mentioned exactly, there's actually a sutra. So there's a sutta, as you would say in Pali, the Sabba Sutta, the sutta on the all, which can be found in the so-called book of the 6 sense spaces, Shad Ayatana Vagga, of connected discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya. And it's, as you said, Buddhism is really concerned with the world of experience. So what the Buddha, so the basic message here is that all that exists is the eye, the ear, the nose. So it's really about sensory fields. And so I just quickly say, who's interested, since I work on Buddhist phenomenology, in one of my papers on roots and roots, I also quoted from this sutta, and it's lovely that you also bring this founding scene of the flower, or actually the direct transmission, which is very interesting to semioticians, right? So we always talk about mediation. What about questions of direct transmission? So I just wanted to give you that feedback. Very interesting, and I hope we're going to hear more about this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina, for your comments and input. I'm actually working on an article right now, and I hope that it can, beat into shape that is readable in the future. Yeah, I'm very excited about this because my own understanding of semiotics is I can't think of it as a field, just a field, or just a domain, or even just a discipline. I can't think of it as a discipline, but it's a discipline as in a practice itself. So this is why I use this title, What is Semiotics but Serious Modeling, in the editorial for the special issue. And this is why I tend to think of Sebeok, and all of us, as artists in semiotics. We have our own styles, and then we do our style. And we by being semioticians, we are engaged in our own semiosis. Yeah, so I'm very excited about this orientation of study in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Susan?
Yes, hello to everybody, and thank you, Hongbing, for your talk. Yes, I just wanted to, in response to various comments, remember that Sebeok authored an essay entitled, I think, Semiosis and Semiotics, What Lies in Their Future. So, yes, of course, I think he was looking at the future and doing so with the instruments of science. He didn't exclude that semiosis could continue beyond life, but he was looking at at the evidence he had, which is life, and looking at how semiosis and life converge. This is one of the axioms that he posits, which did not exclude the continuity of semiosis beyond life, or to be explored. So as a scientist, he was open-minded, obviously, in every direction possible. Then concerning I remember I met Sebeok, the first time I met Sebeok was at a conference in Portugal, and he was doing a course. He held a series of lessons on the magician, on the figure of the magician, and therefore signs in magic. That was how I met Sebeok, which was another important aspect of his research. He was looking at unintentional communication, unintentional signs, and showing how important unintentional signs are in intentional communication. And this was also connected to his research in biosemiotics and interest in communication in the animal world, in the non-human animal world, let's say. So unintentionality, involuntary signs as the absolute, as one of the conditions for communication through verbal language, intentional and unintentional. So whether that connects or not with telepathy, I don't know, but he was certainly very, very attentive to the signs that we produce unintentionally, which he also considered as the main part of sign production, even when we are communicating intentionally. So, you know, and that connected him also in a sense to all the work that authors like Freud had done in psychoanalysis, showing the importance of unintentional signs, even in intentional communication. And then, of course, Charles Morris was Thomas Sebeok's direct teacher and mentor. And Charles Morris was an expert of Zen philosophy. Zen philosophy enters his semiotics. Charles Morris not only authored technical books in semiotic theory, but also wrote a series of books on signs and values, and is also the author of wisdom poetry. So it's interesting how these are various dimensions of life and sign activity and semiosis. And in the theoretical universe of people like Sebeok, Morris, but also Peirce, I mean, there's a lineage there, isn't there? None of these dimensions are excluded. And this is what I call a truly scientific attitude to understanding signs and semiosis. Morris said very clearly, states very clearly that in the science of man that he was working at, using also semiotics, the body is central. The body is central to the sign and to semiosis. So, and this is a semiotician in a scientific sense. I mean, Morris is the person who was looking at biology and exploring the language of biology to develop a suitable language in semiotics to talk adequately about signs. And at the same time, he was interested in Zen philosophy, which enters his semiotic theory, just as the Vedanta Sada, Veda, enters, for example, the theory of meaning of Victoria Welby. And it's not incidental, I believe. There are connections between all these people I have named, they all seem to work in a similar direction and come up with complementary understandings, I think, and research concerning human semiosis, communication in the human world.
Thank you, Susan, for the insights. Really, really helpful. You know, it's basically showing you a new direction to look. I haven't thought of that. I hadn't thought of the Charles Morris, the
Charles
connection.
Morris is undervalued, but everybody's forgotten about Charles Morris. But Charles Morris is a central figure in American semiotics through Tom Sebeok. Sebeok did not underestimate Morris at all. In fact, re-edited his works in a big volume of 1971 entitled Writings on the General Science of Science by Charles Morris. There are a few interesting figures that tend to be forgotten, and Charles Morris is one of those for the Americans, but Ferruccio Rossilandi in Italy is another one. Adam Schaff in Poland is another one. Floyd Merrill, whom Sebeok had described as the most polyhedric figure that he had ever come across. So there you go.
I recognize the significance and importance of Charles Morris in the history of semiotics, but I didn't know about his the Zen side to Charles.
Charles Morris went to China. He was very much interested in China, had fundings and went to China to do his research. His book, The Open Self, 1948, I think that, and then other books after that, whether it Paths of Life and World Religions, a series of books are related to his research and to the time he spent in China. And Morris was Sebeok's most beloved mentor. So, you know, there are connections out there.
These connections are really important. One of the three semioticians I just showed you, Shen Kun Li, his teacher, one of his own teachers by the name of Zhou Liquan, actually, he knew Charles Morris back in those years. And this is why Sebeok was so interested in, and he wanted to establish connections with Zhou Liquan. And when he was planning to come to visit China in 98, and he insisted specifically that he want to meet Zhou Liquan because he was his own teacher, Charles Morris, and had personal contact and correspondence and a very close relationship with Zhou Liquan. They also said something quite interesting. They mentioned that Charles Morris was very into the Chinese palmistry, like reading palms. That was a very interesting aspect. I didn't include in the talk earlier, but yeah, that just came to my mind. Thank you, Susan. These are very important connections to look into.
Okay. Paul, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Hongbing, just one one observation that I would put on top of this as well that you've made me think about is that in relation to being interested in Eastern thought, and in respect to what Susan said about Morris and Peirce too, I think one thing that I don't know if you agree, but one thing that is quite pronounced in Sebeok's thought and theory is that he's not a fatalist. You know, in the European tradition in particular, you get a lot of fatalism in philosophy and social thought, and for Sebeok, you know, if he's presented with, you know, some foibles of humanity, for him the glass is always half full rather than half empty, you know, and gloriously half full. So I'm thinking, I've made this distinction before, but there's a lot of work on so-called oculocentrism, you know, where the metaphor of vision and seeing, and then surveillance and restrictions and all the repressiveness that goes with that. That theory is quite rife in continental philosophy, and you know, is spread to other areas like film theory and so on. But you know, that's the kind of thing that you just couldn't align with anything that Sebeok did, because for Sebeok, we were so hapless. Humans were so hapless in the face of communication. They were so, or rather, we continue to be so unwitting in our communication that there are so many horizons opening up, even with the smallest utterance or the smallest communicative interaction. And for him, that was like a territory. I think, you know, suddenly you're in a new territory, a little bit like the way that the Umwelt finds new horizons all the time. And his work, I've kind of characterized it in this way as being non-fatalistic or anti-fatalistic, or certainly not pessimistic in the way that the other strains of thoughts are. And I wonder whether it was that drew him, not as a slavish follower of Eastern philosophy, but at least somebody who had an interest and related it to his own sphere of endeavor.
Yeah, true. I couldn't agree more. Seriously, what you said reminds me of a kind of symbol that is used in the Japanese schools of Zen Buddhism. It's called the Enso stroke. And the common form of Enso stroke is not complete. There's always an opening. And your comment about the Sebeok not being a fatalist is particularly in line with many of the insights from Zen Buddhism.
Susan, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was saying Sebeok was an explorer. He was an explorer of life in all its aspects, and he was scientific from that point of view, open-minded, and that didn't at all exclude this other dimension that we're describing. And in fact, unwitting is a term that characterizes, I mean, it's a term he uses repeatedly. He talks about unwitting signs, unintentional signs, involuntary signs. So interested in exploring possibilities in the world as it presented itself and to the future, I would say. But Augusta's here nudging at me and wanted me to remind you about this book that we published thanks to Paul Cobley. And this is a tiny, do you remember, Paul, a small monograph on Thomas Sebeok, which was published with Postmodern Encounters. It's a small book that as we say in the acknowledgements, it's thanks to Paul Cobley that it exists. His editorial advice was absolutely essential. He actually worked on this book, which was translated in Yugoslavian at the time. And I don't think it's available anymore in English. So Augusta's saying to Hongbing Yu, there it is, why don't you translate this into Chinese?
I look forward to that. Paul is holding a couple of copies in his hands right now. Yeah. I have a copy in my office now.
Okay.
Came to Nanjing in the year 2008. That was when the first international symposium on semiotics was organized and held at Geneva University. And that book provided some of the most important for my back then. Actually, that was the book that actually led me onto the path of studying Sebeok. And I thank you for that.
We've actually got two monographs. This one, which is it's a small little booklet into an introduction to Sebeok, and really thank you to Paul. We'll always say thank you to Paul. He's incredible. His work, in this sense, a follower of Sebeok. You continue Sebeok, don't you, with all the editorial work and talent scouting, I would say.
I wish I had more time to devote to this, but we're now on the hour, Hongbing, and I'd just like to say thank you because you have delivered this in difficult circumstances I know, and not everyone else will know about that, so I won't speak about it except to say many thanks
Thank you.
for doing that. But I would like to leave the final word to you, since you are the future. And then we will close until the next time we celebrate, which may be in a few weeks' time. I don't know. Hong Bing.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. It was an honor of mine to be able to present and my research and my thoughts on Sebeok's connections with the Chinese semioticians, and also his intellectual connection with Eastern philosophies, especially Zen Buddhism. So I think of it as a privilege, and I thank you for your attention. And I hope that this research and this talk will invite future works and on Sebeok and also in semiotics in general. So I will close it now, and take care, friends. Bye. And have a nice holiday.